All right, we're live. Thank you again for joining me. Whether you're watching this live right now, let's see, I don't think we have anybody yet, but whether you're watching later on, and I'm sorry, I have been a little inconsistent with my times. Sometimes it's been 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and I'm trying to get better and better at that. So I do apologize. I think 1 o'clock is the sweet spot, 1 p.m. my time, which is I guess MST, Mountain Standard. I believe that's kind of the sweet spot. So let's go ahead and get started today. I have a couple of things I want to talk about, but first, let me present my screen. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be looking at Numbers 19, 20, 21, and like the first verse of chapter 22. We're talking about the red heifer. We're talking about prophecy. We're talking about a lot of things, a lot of different topics in the scriptures today. And let me share my screen. Let me go to a tab here that I want to start with. It's a screenshot from last week. So somebody left a comment and they said, Abraham, and this is, hopefully I'm saying your name right, Sister Dorothea. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Abraham, we were taught that it was your first increase on what came into your home when you tithe. What you taught today doesn't mean that we don't have to tithe. So I just wanted to bring that up. Because someone had a question. I did not address that last week. Remember in Numbers 18, we finished talking about the tithing, the principle of tithing. And it was agricultural products from the land that were given to the Levites. It was mostly agricultural products. I don't, if I recall, I didn't see anything else. I didn't see money. It was all agricultural products, first fruit offerings, and meat offerings and those sorts of things. So last week I emphasized last Shabbat that the tithe is very often misrepresented. We have people running around today saying, give me this paper fiat central bank run and controlled currency that's created out of nothing. It doesn't have intrinsic value in and of itself. It's just a paper note that says Federal Reserve note. I mean, in the United States it is anyways, but it's a petrodollar. It's anyways. Basically, I was making the point that people today are like tithe. It's the one of the few things that they really ever talk about from the Old Testament, even though they say it's done away with, even though they say the Old Testament is a yoke of bondage, trying to keep the laws of God, the instructions of God, or yoke of bondage. It's all done away with. They love to bring out that one little thing called tithing, and they love to say, give me money. And so what I was making the strong point of is that if you actually look at what the tithe was, it was agricultural products. It was not paper money for sure, but it wasn't even like silver. Like I don't see silver or gold talked about there. It's agricultural goods, agricultural products meant to be enjoyed and consumed. Which those things can be exchanged for silver or gold, and those things have a value in silver and gold. But what I'm saying is that the text is very much abused, and so that does not mean, though, like going back to Dorothea's question, I'm not saying don't tithe. I think that's a pretty good principle. Whatever income, whatever comes into your house of monetary value, taking 10%, setting that aside for a ministry, setting 10% aside for a cause, something that you believe in that is maybe fulfilling the role of a Levite in the sense that they're instructing, they're teaching the laws of God. Obviously, I get kind of worked up. It kind of weirds me out when people are like, I'm a Levite. And people kind of say, in this movement, going back to our Hebrew roots, in this whole movement, whatever you want to call it, messianic, whatever you want to call it, people say, oh, I'm a Levite, but it's like, dude, okay, show me the DNA evidence and show me like hard evidence that you're a Levite. But I think rather, so there's that side of it. People like to jump to conclusions, say, I'm a Levite, so give me all the goodies. I would be very careful to ever say that, for sure. I never say that. But what I will say is give to causes, give to organizations or people that you perceive are deserving, or let God lead you. Like, let the Spirit lead you to give that tithe to whom you think is necessary for. Like for instance, this year we had a couple of rams that were firstborn, And so we separated the firstborn, we consecrated them and sold them for money and gave the money to a ministry. My wife and I did that. We gave the money to a ministry that we felt was, and we prayed about, like, this is legit. This is who we're going to support. So again, that's the beauty of going back to the land, having a homestead, having that resilient homestead, a farm. You can actually have the agricultural products and go back to actually keeping the Torah. And again, I'm not trying to sound the trumpet and be like, oh, look at me, I'm tithing. It's just that, we talked about tithing last week. I'm bringing up this example where I had these firstborn male rams. I sold them for money, and I literally gave that money to a ministry that I believe in. That's one example of tithing for sure. But certainly, if you work a job or if you have your own business, you take 10% of that, and you can do the same thing. 10% of increase of your whatever, however you kind of want to apply that. I think it should be applied. I think there's a blessing in apply it, giving to widows and orphans. There's a the third year tithe for that. Like, there's all these different principles when it comes to tithing. Obviously, we just touched on Numbers 18, which it's not super, like, we don't have the whole clear picture of tithing there, but definitely it's been abused. The whole topic of tithing has been abused, misrepresented, and people say, give me paper money, when it's not paper money. It's supposed to be agricultural goods. I mean, let's just set the record straight. Now, as long as we understand that, then yeah, convert your paper money into things or gifts, or if you want to give the paper money directly to an organization, I think that's good. So hopefully that answers that question. Hopefully that wasn't too long-winded either. I want to get into Numbers 19 today, where we're going to start talking about the red heifer. And this is something that I was going to start talking about in a podcast that I was putting together this last week, but I just did not have time to finish it. It's just been kind of crazy for me, guys. So let's go to Numbers 19. Let's go ahead. I got my screen share going here, and so when we talk about the red heifer, it's interesting. It's all about purification. Now I'm going to start reading from the New King James, like I always do. Now Yehovah spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, this is the ordinance of the law which Yehovah has commanded, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they bring you a red heifer without blemish, in which there is no defect, and on which a yoke has never come. So if you look up this phrase, these words here, red heifer, it doesn't show up anywhere else in the Bible. This is the only place. Numbers 19 is the only place you find red heifer. So there's a lot of doctrine. There's a lot of stuff that's derived from just this place in Scripture. So we're going to dive into it a little bit. And so when you really quickly, let's just do this right now before I forget. When you look up the word heifer, hopefully there's no confusion over what this means. If you just look it up, textbook dictionary definition is a young cow over 1 year old that has not produced a calf. So it's not a bull, right? A heifer is a female cow, hasn't produced a calf. It's over 1 year old. Let's just, thought I'd mention that, kind of that textbook definition. So we're all on the same page. That's what a heifer is. A red heifer. Now, the red, we'll talk more about what that means when it's red, because is it like fire hydrant red, or is it like a brownish red? We'll talk about that. But there's no defect, without blemish. You look up this word, it's without spot, without blemish. There's no defect, so it's not maimed or crippled. It's pure red, whatever that red is. We'll talk about that. Without blemish, without spot, and it's never done any work. No yoke has ever come upon it to where it's done like hard work. So this is what the commandment is straight from the throne. You shall give it to Eleazar the priest, that he may take it outside the camp, and it shall be slaughtered before him. And Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger, and sprinkle some of its blood 7 times directly in front of the tabernacle of meeting. Then the heifer shall be burned in his sight. Its hide, its flesh, its blood, and its offal shall be burned. See, I don't even know what that is. I got to look that up in a second. And, I think it's refuse. Yeah, I don't know why the New King James says that. My other version says refuse or dung. And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet and cast them into the midst of the fire burning the heifer. Then the priest shall wash his clothes, and he shall bathe in water, and afterward he shall come into the camp. The priest shall be unclean until evening, The one who burns it shall wash his clothes with water, bathe in water, and shall be unclean till evening. Then a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and store them outside the camp in a clean place, and they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel for water of purification. It is for purifying from sin. That's a very interesting concept there. And then it says, the one who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. It shall be a statute forever to the children of Israel and to the stranger who dwells among them. Remember, one law for the native born and for the stranger. One law, one people, one kingdom. So Numbers 19:11 kind of continues a different, or starts a different thought. This thought of the whole red heifer kind of ends here. It talks about using the ashes. I believe we'll read it in a moment, but yeah. The point, my point in stopping here, we're going to pause right here. Numbers 19, 1 through 10. It's very clear to me that these 10 verses are important. They're significant. They're interesting. But my gosh, it's just 10 verses. And a lot of doctrine has been created from these 10 verses. So let's take a look at what they say. And again, my whole point in the way that I study the scriptures is, what do the scriptures actually say? What's the original intended meaning? Not, what does man think about? Like, what do men say about this? I don't care what men have to say. Like, what's the original intended meaning of the text? So we have this red heifer, we're told, and then it's burned. It's turned into ashes, and then those ashes are used to actually purify water, and it's for purifying from sin. So let's take a look real quick. Remember how I said, I wonder what this word is. So Numbers 19:5. I have my other, let's see what the other translation I have here says. Yeah, the Cohen is to take, okay, yes. Refuse. So I'm assuming that means dung. 19 Numbers. So the whole thing is burned, basically. The whole thing is burned. Yeah, dung in the King James. The whole entire animal is burned. The important thing here is that it's outside the camp. You see that kind of repeated over and over again. What I want to talk about is the purifying from sin. Here's what I'll say, right? Here's what I'll say. Well, let's keep reading, actually. Let's keep reading. I was going to pause here and talk about something, but it just occurred to me that we need to actually finish the entire chapter for it to really make sense. We need to get the whole context here. So Numbers 19:11. We'll talk about the red heifer in a second, and I'll talk about some modern stuff going on with the rebuilding of the temple. What the Jews have to say about this is very interesting, how they kind of spin this whole thing. But Numbers 19:11 says, he who touches the dead body of anyone shall be unclean 7 days. He shall purify himself with the water on the third day, and on the seventh day, then he will be clean. But if he does not purify himself on the third day, and on the seventh day, he will not be clean. Whoever touches the body of anyone who has died and does not purify himself defiles the tabernacle of Jehovah. That person shall be cut off from Israel. He shall be unclean because the water of purification was not sprinkled on him. His uncleanness is still on him. So when we see water purification here, to me, it's really clear that's the red heifer water purification with the ashes sprinkled in it. So water purification. So it does connect. The whole chapter does kind of connect together. But anyways, Numbers 19:14. This is the law when a man dies in this tent. All who come into the tent and all who are in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. And every open vessel which has no cover fastened on it is unclean. Whoever's in the open field whoever in the open field touches one who is slain by a sword or has died, or a bone of a man or a grave, shall be unclean 7 days. And for the unclean person, they shall take some of the ashes of the heifer burnt for the purification from sin, and running water shall be put on them in a vessel. A clean person shall take hyssop and dip it in the water, sprinkle it on the tent and on all the vessels, and all the persons who were there, or on the one who touched a bone, the slain, the dead, or a grave. The clean person shall sprinkle the unclean on the third day and on the seventh day, and on the seventh day he shall purify himself, wash his clothes, bathe in water, and at evening he shall be clean. But the man who is unclean and does not purify himself, that person shall be cut off from among the assembly, because he has defiled the sanctuary of Jehovah. The water of purification has not been sprinkled on him. He is unclean. It shall be a perpetual, other translations say forever, statute for them. or a statute forever. He who sprinkles the water of purification shall wash his clothes, and he who touches the water of purification shall be unclean until evening. Whatever the unclean person touches shall be unclean, and the person who touches it shall be unclean until evening. So, and that's the end of the chapter. So if we look at this word perpetual statute, this is a perpetual statute forever. How long is forever, right? Forever, it just keeps going. So, or at least it's for a very long period of time. And what everybody will say in the modern Christian evangelical world is that, oh, this is all done away with, but we know better than that, because the two witnesses of the covenant, heaven and earth, have not passed away. Therefore, no jot or tittle has passed away from the law. So the perpetual statute then. So does this still apply today? Obviously, the Jews think so. That's why they've been looking for a red heifer for quite some time. And we'll talk about what's going on in the modern world today with the rebuilding of the temple. Before we do, notice that the red heifer is necessary for purification from sin, from touching a dead body, from someone who dies in their tent, whether it's somebody out in the tent or in the open field. If you touch the body or whatever, there's this concept that you need to be purified with the ashes of the red heifer. So let me ask the question, obvious question. Do you think anybody at this point in the history of the Exodus, right? They had the Exodus, they're in the wilderness, all these different things happen. Let's just talk about the golden calf. Over like thousands and thousands of people get killed by the Levites because of the sin of the golden calf worship. That's one incident. Then, there is fighting. They fight against, whatever, different people groups. My point is that people have died. Okay, even in Korah's rebellion in the last reading, people have died. The children of Israel have come into contact with dead bodies on more than one occasion. And so we know that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't change. And so what I'm going to say is that this chapter, this red heifer, I'm going to say that even though it's recorded in Numbers, I'm going to make the argument. I'm going to submit to you that the red heifer, this whole commandment, was actually given a while ago, because they have been coming into contact with so many dead bodies, and people died, and they were buried, or like they were touching dead bodies. You know what I mean? And so they needed a way to be purified. And I'm going to say that because God doesn't change, even though this is recorded here, I'm pretty sure that they had access to the ashes of a red heifer for fulfilling this law and not living in lawlessness, not living in sin. I'm going to say that this was available a while ago. It's just that it's recorded here. And again, the reason for me saying that is because I believe that God makes provision for his people so they don't commit sin, and they can be considered pure, purified, and not unclean. Because it literally says the one who does not purify himself in Numbers 19:20 shall be cut off from among the assembly because he has defiled the sanctuary. So to me, it's really clear that this red heifer commandment, that's forever, it's perpetual till heaven and earth pass away. It was already given a while ago. It's just recorded here for us. Okay. So with that being said, let's take a look at how what's going on with the Jews actually, and let's see just understand. And this is a kind of a different article. It's not really talking about the red heifer, but this is from Jewish Telegraphic Agency. That the Temple Institute announces a school to train Levitical priests. This was back in 2016. Okay, so this is a little bit ago. 2016. But basically, in Jerusalem, the modern day Jewish people have been wanting to reestablish the priesthood, reestablish a temple, similar to Nehemiah and Ezra, building the temple. They're looking to do this. And it's really interesting what this article has to say. The Temple Institute, dedicated to reestablishing the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, announced it is opening a school for training Levitical priests for their eventual service in a new temple. The Institute ran several pilot programs in recent years and now is embarking on a mission to teach Kohanim all the practical skills required to serve in the third Holy Temple. It said in a statement. The Institute has opened an Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign, okay, yada, yada. Uh, let's see. So they see this as a radical goal, replacing the Dome of the Rock with a new Jewish holy temple. That's not going to happen because, that's enough of this article. Let's take a look at another article, but this is actually about the red heifer. But the Temple Institute, they've already purchased a plot of land, and it's on the Mount of Olives. It actually says that right here. A plot of land on the Mount of Olives has been purchased and is ready for a valid sacrifice, the first since the destruction of the Second Temple. So what this article says, this is from allisrael.com. The red heifer sacrifice could take place in 1 year in Jerusalem. So again, they're just trying to do this whole thing that we see in Numbers 19, and they're saying, hey, we need to have this. We need to have these sacrifices going on once again. Now, what I find interesting about Numbers 19, if we just go back to that for a second, is another reason I said that this law was probably given a long time ago and it's just recorded in Numbers 19 is because they're already the priests, the Levites at this point in history, they're already doing a lot of sacrifices, rituals, burning incense, they're lighting the lamps inside of the tabernacle. Like they're doing all of these things. They're doing all of these rituals. They're doing all of these commandments. And to say that they didn't have a way to purify themselves, I think is inaccurate. It's misleading, because how would they be clean to do the work of the tabernacle if they didn't have the red heifer beforehand a while ago? Because literally what's going on here, if we go back to this tab, is this what they're saying is we cannot actually do not tabernacle because that's a tent, but temple stuff. Jews can't do temple stuff until they have a way to purify themselves. So to me, it's pretty clear that the red heifer happened a while ago in the original Exodus and everything. But anyways, this is what they say. The sacrifice of red heifer could take place on Mount of Olives in Jerusalem as early as 13 months from now. Now, if we look at when this article was written, it was written in the September 22nd, 2022. Now, if you've been following my work and you understand how I derived the Hebrew calendar, how I looked at the genealogical records of Genesis, not deviating from going to extra biblical texts that contradict the Masoretic text, but just looking at the text, the actual text of the Hebrew, not looking at the book of Jubilees, not looking at all these other weird extra biblical books, but just looking at Genesis, calculating the days of all the firstborn sons when they were born, and doing all the things that I showed you in the podcast, and looking at the 120 Shane of mankind, I've shown you that there's something very special about next year in September, right? And it's the fact that the abomination of desolation is set to take place on September 22nd, 2023. Well, I find it fascinating. That when we go to this article, they're literally saying that a red heifer sacrifice is going to take place in about a year, and that a year from September 22nd when this is written. Now, I don't know why they're saying 13 months, as early as 13 months. I don't see why it couldn't be sooner, and it just lands on September, which is my date projection for the abomination of desolation. Is there a connection here? Is there something here that connects end times prophecy to this red heifer, to the Jews wanting to build a temple? I think there's a connection here, big time, and I'm going to explore this more in a podcast episode. I don't have time to go into extreme detail right now, but let's just keep reading. Texas businessman Byron Stinson, the man instrumental in locating, helping get 5 red heifers from the United States to Israel. They literally flew from Texas, these 5 red heifers, told All Israel News that finding the sacrifice-ready cows was not the only objective. Bonet Israel, the organization Stinson is involved with, has also purchased land on the Mount of Olives that meets the requirements for a biblical sacrifice outside of a temple. Stinson explained that a sacrifice does not necessitate a new temple. It can also be conducted at a certain height and direction, and the plot on the Mount of Olives meets these requirements. He says, this is a big step. This is a huge sign. If we're able to do the ceremony in 1.5 to 2 years, he said, it doesn't mean that the temple is going to be built within 1 year, 10 years, 40 years, or 100 years, because you have the ashes. Solomon had the ashes of a red heifer and then lasted 1,000 years, he says. The red heifer does not mean you have to immediately build. However, I think it's like a key that turns on the engine, he added. So 5 red heifers landed in Israel about 2 weeks ago. Too much fanfare and celebration. And if we go to this article here, I'm not gonna play the video here, but I will do that on my podcast. But like when they arrive, there's like all this excitement going on, and there's literally cattle arriving at the airport, in Ben Gurion, and they're from Texas, and like I mentioned, and yeah, it's a really interesting thing that they feel that they have to have the ashes of the red heifer in order to build a temple, which they feel is required for doing biblical stuff. Um, I'll talk about this more in the podcast. What I will say, what I will say, is that the Bible doesn't have a whole lot to say about a red heifer. It really doesn't. Like I told you, it's like 10 verses. And if you want a little bit more context, there's this purification when you touch dead bodies from 11 to like 22 of Numbers 19. There's all these other verses, like 11 more verses, but you have 10 verses that are like one thought about the red heifer. Then you have another 11 verses that talk about what you do with the ashes. Some people say that the red heifer represents Yeshua. I don't know. I personally, I'm not going to make that statement because I don't speak where the Bible is silent. To me, it's not very obvious that it's Yeshua. Yes, Yeshua purify us from our sins, 100%. Was he crucified outside of Jerusalem on Mount Golgotha? Yeah, he was. But he's the lamb that takes away the sin of the world. But he's compared to a lamb. He's compared to, I guess you can compare him to a red heifer, but for sure he's a lamb. He's the snake on the pole, which we're going to read about very soon, when there's a bronze snake that Moses lifts up. And anyone who looks at it, he's going to be healed from being bit by a snake. So we're going to look at the bronze serpent. So he's compared to a bronze serpent. When you look at the casting of lots on the Day of Atonement, there's the Azazel goat, the scapegoat, but there's also the goat that represents Yehovah, which is the same thing as Yeshua. So he's a goat, he's a lamb, he's a serpent. So yeah, I guess you could make the argument, he's a red heifer, but to me, it's not really clear because the scriptures haven't really made it super clear that the red heifer represents Yeshua. You can certainly speculate, but I'm not going to do that. So for me, it's not really clear. When we look at the red heifer, though, and what the job of it is that it purifies from sin, I would make the case that for sure, there's a sacrifice of Yeshua that purifies once and for all, makes atonement once and for all for sin. But at the same time, it does say that this is a perpetual statute. It's a forever statute. So to me, this is one of those passages of scripture where I'm sure a lot of guys out there, I'm sure a lot of Bible teachers will be like, this is it. This is how it is, and they get super dogmatic. They come up with a lot of doctrines off of this. For me, it's one of those things like, okay, I'm going to stash this away in my brain for later. And I'll let Yeshua, when he returns, I'll let him kind of sort this thing out because, like I said, they were already, if there's two ways of looking at this. The red heifer, it shows up in Numbers 19, but they had already been doing a bunch of priestly, Levitical, like priesthood stuff without the red heifer. But if you believe what I believe, and the red heifer kind of was already introduced a while ago, it's just recorded here, that makes more sense. But either way, the New Testament teaches very clearly that Yeshua is that purification from sin. And that's probably why we really haven't needed the red heifer and another temple and all of these things after Yeshua, because those things are now basically, he's taking care of them in heaven, because all the temple and everything is a reflection of the heavenly, the earthly temple, the earthly tabernacle. That's a reflection of the heavenly. So where my mind goes with all this is that Yeshua, this is kind of a slippery slope. It's kind of dangerous. Yeshua is the fulfillment of these things, but that's kind of a slippery slope too, right? Because then I've heard people say, "Oh, he fulfilled this, he fulfilled that, he fulfilled that. We don't have to do anything anymore. We don't have to even think about the Old Testament scriptures." And that's such a slippery slope to say that Yeshua fulfilled this thing with the purification from sin. So for me, it's like stash this one away for later because I don't totally understand it. I don't think very many people do, but a lot of teachers sure make it seem like they know what this is talking about and what this represents and what the real meaning is, but I don't totally 100% get it. I'm not going to pretend like I do. Let's just keep moving on. I'm going to talk more about the red heifer and how that ties into end times prophecy in the podcast. I'm going to talk about Ezekiel 22, which connects. Yeah, there's a lot of things. There's a lot more there, but for sake of time, I'm going to keep moving on and jump into. Let's take a look. Numbers 20. Then the children of Israel, the whole congregation, came in the wilderness of Zin in the first month. The people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Now, there was no water from the congregation, so they gathered together against Moses and Aaron. Then pause right there. How many times have we seen this, right? So Numbers 20, verse 2, here they come again against Aaron and Moses after they've already established authority. How many times with the rod budding and producing almonds, with all the signs and the miracles? And so what happens next is really, it is pretty harsh what happens. Well, no, actually, it doesn't happen here. It happens in the later chapter. But they gather together to complain against Moses and Aaron. What I wanted to mention here is that depending on how you're counting, we had the 10 deadly sins. At 10, the number 10, there was like a cutoff there. Yehovah finally told the people, hey, you're not going to enter into the land of rest, to the promised land, because you just didn't believe. You didn't have faith. You didn't even have a relationship with me the way that he wanted to have a relationship with them. Like, they just didn't believe him. They didn't believe his words. So after the 10 deadly sins, the people were cut off. Now, last week, I kind of made the statement. I kind of made the case. I think there's, count 11 and 12, because Korah's rebellion, you got these 250 guys. There's a rebellion. And then there's another sin from the people that they're like, Moses, you let the earth swallow up God's people. How dare you? And then there was another judgment. There's another plague that was stopped when incense was burned. So I'm actually going to backtrack. I'm going to change my mind. Is that okay? I'm going to change my mind a little bit. I think that there was the 10 deadly sins for sure. And I think after Korah's rebellion, the people are like, you killed, God's people by letting Korah die, and all this stuff happened. The 250 guys were burned alive. You're letting God's people die. I think that's number 11. And so I'm going to say that this is number 12. Like, there's the 10 deadly sins. They didn't learn, right? There's still another sin and another sin here when they're just complaining against Moses and Aaron. And the people, this is Numbers 23. And the people contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had died when our brethren died before Yehovah. Why have you brought up this assembly of Yehovah into the wilderness, that we and our animals should die here? Why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us into this evil place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines of pomegranates, nor is there any water to drink. So Moses went from the presence of the assembly to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and they fell on their faces. This is very common. This has happened many times, where they fall on their faces. And the glory of Yehovah appeared to them. And then Yehovah spoke to Moses, saying, take the rod, and you and your brother Aaron gather the congregation together. Speak to the rock. Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock, and give drink to the congregation and their animals. So notice something interesting here before we go to verse 9. Notice that even though the people are complaining, it doesn't make mention here that Yehovah is angry. It just says that his glory appears, but he's not actually angry. Like we've seen in, when the people are faithless and they're complaining, it doesn't say that he's angry. He's like, here, we're going to get water out of this rock. Like, I think that was really interesting. There's no wrath. There's nothing crazy going on here. Nothing unusual. Nothing. There's no, how would you say, consequences for the people's behavior up front, like there sometimes is. So this is what it says in Numbers 20 verse 9. So Moses took the rod from before Yehovah as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock. And he said to them, hear now, you rebels. Must we bring water for you out of this rock? Pause right there. Notice that Moses is actually taking the credit. This is very subtle, but Moses is taking the credit and the glory for what God is about to do. He literally says, must we bring water for you out of this rock? So he's kind of taking the credit there. I mean, yeah, he's the representative of God to the people. I get that, but he should have said, look at what Yehovah is about to do for you, as he's done many times, he took a little bit of the credit here. And not only that, then we read in Numbers 20, verse 11, Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank. So we see the downfall of Moses here. First, he kind of takes the credit saying, now do we have to like prove ourselves again by bringing water for you out of the rock? Like we have to prove ourselves. Like he's kind of taking some of the credit here. And then it says that he struck the rock twice with his rod. He probably hit it once, and he like, oh man, nothing's happening. Let me hit it. Instead of speaking, right? He could have maybe repented right there. Instead of repenting and doing what God actually said, which is speak to the rock, he hits it again, and the water comes out. Basically, doubling down and reinforcing the fact that he is not going to actually obey God. He's not going to obey the voice of Yehovah, but he's going to hit it once, do what's right in his own eyes because nothing happened, and hit it again. And that is why in Numbers 20:12, Yehovah spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me, to hallow me, to sanctify me, to make me, esteemed in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore, you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. This was the water of Meribah, because the children of Israel contended with Yehovah, and he was hallowed among them. So this is Moses' unpardonable sin. The people had their 10 sins that they committed, the unpardonable sins. They were not allowed to enter the promised land. Obviously, Elohim is still working with them. They're still seeing miracles. They're still being provided for. They're still being given manna. But I guess the unforgivable sin that's going to keep Moses not necessarily out of heaven, right? Moses went to heaven, right? But what keeps him out of the promised land, the physical blessing of the promised land here on earth, is that he didn't obey the voice of God and took a little bit of the credit for the miracle up front. And so, I think the important lesson here is, let's do our best again to listen to all the words, all of the Torah, all of the law, all of the words that God has commanded his people, but also to not take the credit when he's working in our midst. Don't take the credit for what he's doing, but give him the glory instead. Numbers 20, verse 14. Now Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the hardship that has befallen us, how our fathers went down to Egypt, and we dwelt in Egypt a long time. And the Egyptians afflicted us and our fathers. So remember, Edom is another name for Esau, which is the brother of Jacob. So basically, these are like relatives. The children of Israel and Edom are relatives. And then it says in verse 16, when we cried out to Yehovah, he heard our voice and sent the angel and brought us up out of Egypt. Now here we are in Kadesh, a city on the edge of your border. Please let us pass through your country. We will not pass through fields or vineyards, nor will we drink water from wells. We will go along the king's highway. We will not turn aside to the right hand or to the left until we have passed through your territory. Then Edom said to him, you shall not pass through my land, lest I come out against you with the sword. So the children of Israel said to him, we will go by the highway, and if I or my livestock drink any of your water, I will pay for it. Let me only pass through on foot, nothing more. Then he said, you shall not pass through. So Edom came out against them with many men and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his territory, so Israel turned away from him. To me, this is brothers were born for contention. I'm reminded of those words in scripture. Brothers were born for contention. Edom refused to let his brother pass through his land, really for no reason at all, and was hostile towards Israel. And I'm wondering if the fact that the people complained about not having water just a couple of moments before this all happened, I'm wondering if they wouldn't have complained, if maybe they would have been blessed with the ability to go through the land of Edom. But like Edom's heart was turned against Israel. And what I find interesting here in Numbers 20:16 is that it says that the angel was sent and brought us up out of Egypt, and now we are here. Let's look up that word angel real quick. What is that? Is that actual malak? Looks like it is messenger. So it could be messenger. So I know a lot of people, like, it even capitalized the word A. It says angel with a capital A. This could be referring to Moses, actually. It could be a prophet, priest, teacher. ambassador, messenger. So I think it's kind of weird, to be honest with you, that in the English this word is actually uppercased, angel, like it's Jesus or something. Again, I don't like to say things or insert my ideas in the text when it's just not there. So I would say watch out for this one. I think this is a little strange that it's capital A. It really, I mean, to me, it's referring to Moses. Who else was the angel like that brought them out of Egypt? Who else was the messenger that brought them out of Egypt? Who else received the message of the burning bush? Was it an angel or was it Moses? So, anyways, just a little bit of translator's bias there, in my opinion, capitalizing the A and making it seem like it's something that's different than what it really is. It's just Moses. And in fact, it was Moses that sent the messengers. So Moses sent angels from Kadesh, right? Let's look at that word. Moses sent malak. So he sent angels. Let's capitalize the A and call it Jesus, right? Again, it's important to just let the text speak for itself. Did Moses send angels from Kadesh to the king of Edom, or did he just send messengers? So when we come down here and it's a capital A, I know it might be a little nitpicky, but for me, let's just not read into this too much. He heard our voice. Jehovah heard our voice, and he sent Moses and brought us up out of Egypt. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Let's not get too crazy with that one, in my opinion. I don't think it's a pre-incarnate, showing up or appearance of Jesus, which is what most people would teach, because that capital A throws everybody off. Now, let's look at Numbers 20:22. The children of Israel, the whole congregation, journeyed from Kadesh and came to Mount Hor. And Jehovah spoke to Moses and Aaron in Mount Hor by the border of the land of Edom, saying, Aaron shall be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land which I have given to the children of Israel, because you rebelled against my word at the water of Meribah. So what I find interesting here is that because of Moses' sin, because Moses is the one, it says that he took the rod and struck the rock. Could it have been Aaron doing it? Maybe, but I mean, let's see. If we go back, was it Moses or Aaron? Let's see. Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock. So it was Moses indeed. I was about to misspeak there, misrepresent the text, but it literally says that you rebelled and therefore Aaron. So our sin affects other people. Just got to keep that in mind. Even those pet sins, closet sins. I'm going to do a podcast episode I'm putting together right now about pornography, because that's a big one for a lot of people. But even the pet sins, the closet sins, maybe the things that people aren't aware of and they can't see, even those things have consequences, not just for us, but the people around us. And it's not that I'm just going to talk about pornography. I'm going to talk about how to get rid of your addiction. It could be a porn addiction or alcohol addiction, but how to get rid of an addiction once and for all. It's going to be a beautiful presentation. I can't wait to do that one on the podcast coming up soon. How to get rid of those pet sins, closet sins, because like it shows here in Numbers 24, that sin affects not just us, but affects those around us, even when that sin is not obvious and out in the open and it's a closet pet sin, which I think is the most dangerous. Numbers 20:25, it says, Jehovah speaking, take Aaron and Eleazar his son and bring them up to Mount Hor, and strip Aaron of his garments, put them on Eleazar his son, for Aaron shall be gathered to his people and die there. So Moses did just as Jehovah commanded, and they went up to Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. Moses stripped Aaron of his garments, put them on Eleazar his son. Aaron died there on the top of the mountain. Then Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. Now when all the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, all the house of Israel mourned for Aaron 30 days. What I find interesting here is that Aaron, even though he was not allowed to enter because of the sin, Moses' sin really is what it's showing us here. Obviously, Aaron's not innocent because, whatever. He maybe was complicit by not correcting Moses and telling him, don't strike the rock again, speak to it. I don't know. You can read into this a little bit, but what I find very interesting is that Aaron died gracefully, right? They literally climb up a mountain and he dies gracefully. My wife and I were reading this passage of scripture together, and she brought up the point, he didn't die of tumors, cancer, and blood pressure and diabetes. And he didn't die of anything crazy. He's like, he didn't die a painful kind of like a heart attack, or he died gracefully. He literally had the physical stamina and ability to go up a mountain. And then he was gathered to his people. So he died gracefully. And I think that's something very interesting that I thought I'd mention. And I think with with what I've researched over the years, diet, nutrition, there's things we can do to really facilitate that dying gracefully, if that's what God's will is for our lives. I mean, I think that's something really that I think was interesting. And then they mourned for Aaron 30 days. Um, let's take a look at Numbers 21. Then it says here, the king of Arad, the Canaanite who dwelt in the south, heard that Israel was coming on the road to Atharim. He fought against Israel and took some of them prisoners. Um, what I find interesting about this is that, God allows adversity in our lives. Like I had the flu with 102 whatever fever, like a few weeks ago, and it was killer, man. Like, why does God allow adversity? And like you have this guy, King of Arad, the Canaanite. You have these Canaanites. They're coming in. They attack and they literally take Israelites prisoners. And oftentimes in our lives, like, why do I have this adversity? But look at as a result of this taking place, Israel made a vow to Jehovah and said, if you will indeed deliver this people into my hand, then I will surely destroy their cities. So the adversity created a result. It created an outcome that probably would not have happened if that adversity had not taken place in the lives of the children of Israel. Same is true for us, right? Would they have made a vow if the people that they loved had not been taken prisoners? A vow to do God's will. It really was his will to drive out the Canaanites to possess their land. And so what I think, I know it's hard, I know it's not easy, but we need to actually be looking out when we face adversity like this. Is pretty hardcore adversity. When we face adversity like this, we need to start thinking to ourselves, what is the outcome that God intends here? And how can I draw close to him and submit more to him to see like the actual desired outcome that he wants to see because of this adversity? And then, so it says in Numbers 21:3, and in this case, by the way, it was a vow. So the result of adversity was making a vow. And it says, Jehovah listened to the voice of Israel and delivered up the Canaanites, and they utterly destroyed them in their cities. So the name of the place was called Hormah. Yeah, if you look at the footnote, utter destruction. So that's really fascinating for me, that adversity creates the results that God desires to see in our lives. Like I said, I had the flu. Like I've had a lot of adversity this year, a lot of adversity. And each time I think I've done a decent job. Obviously, I'm not perfect, but I think I've done a decent job in letting that adversity create the outcomes that God desires to see in my life. So I encourage you with that as well, just to do that. And I definitely haven't been perfect. I for some reason, my memory is not the best right now at this moment, but the bronze serpent, this is where we're kind of, let's see, we have a little bit more of a journey. We have some battles, but we have the bronze serpent is a big topic because there's the word made flesh that dwelt among us. We beheld his glory. The word made flesh actually explains what this is, why this was done this way, because this is very unusual what happens here with the bronze serpent. Numbers 21:4. It says this, then they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom, and the soul of the people became very discouraged. On the way, another translation I have says that they grew very impatient. The nephesh of the people became very impatient, and the people spoke against God and Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there's no food, no water, and our soul loathes, despises. If you look up this word, despises, it's to have a feeling of dread. They absolutely hated this worthless bread, the manna from heaven. This really shows you the heart of the people here, that they became very discouraged. Impatient is the word that I've seen, impatient. But to speak to God like that, the consequences are huge. They said, Jehovah sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. This is a pretty like blatantly disrespectful and rebellious thing to say against God, right? He's providing their bread, their daily bread, and they literally say it's worthless. Like that is a slap in the face, big time. Um, so what we see here, right? We had the 10 deadly sins, then we had the sin where the people are like, oh, you killed Korah, that's 11. Um, and we had 12, and I'm gonna say this is probably sin number 13. 12 was when they were like, oh, there's no water, and they're complaining. This is number 13. So we have 13 sins like the congregation committed against God. And so this is what it says after the fiery serpents were biting people and they're dying. Um, the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned. We have spoken against Jehovah and against you. Pray to Jehovah that he might take away the serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people. Then Jehovah said to Moses, make a fiery serpent, set it on a pole, and it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. So Moses made a bronze serpent, put it on a pole, and so it was, if a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived. Let's look at what it means by, I'm kind of curious here. What is that word? And set it upon a pole. I want to see what that is. A standard and sign, pole, banner. Okay, something lifted up. A standard signal. Interesting. A banner. Something lifted high. If we look at this, this is really interesting. There's a connection here to John chapter 3. John chapter 3. There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. This man came to Yeshua by night, or Jesus, and said to him, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. Jesus answered and said to him, most assuredly I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Nicodemus said to him, how can a man be born when he is old? How, can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? Jesus answered, most assuredly I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Do not marvel that I say to you, you must be born again. The wind blows where it wishes in your heart, and you hear the sound of it, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it goes. So is everyone who is born of the Spirit. Nicodemus answered and said to him, how can these things be? Jesus answered and said to him, are you a teacher of Israel? You don't know these things? Most assuredly, I say to you, we speak what we know and testify what we have seen, and you do not receive our witness. If I have told you earthly things and you do not believe, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? No one has ascended to heaven, but he who came down from heaven, that is the Son of Man, who is in heaven. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. And then, of course, Yeshua tells us probably the most famous quote in all the Bible to this day, for God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God, Yeshua, the Messiah. And this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light, does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been done in God. Let's go back. So what a lot of people do is they use this verse here to teach some false doctrines. When Yeshua says no one has ascended to heaven, but he who came down from heaven, a lot of people teach that, oh, when you die, you don't go to heaven. When you die, you don't go to heaven. When you die, you don't go to heaven. People are very confused about the afterlife. Later on in John, we're literally told just 2 chapters later that, when you believe on him, you're born again. Like, you actually experience new life. You're not going to see death. I highly recommend, again, I've talked about this a lot, because people are really confused about the afterlife. It's really mind-blowing how confused people are. Make sure you go and check out, either on YouTube, BitChute, whatever, but check out this episode here, number 17, What is the 1,000-Year Reign? I talk about not just the 1,000-year reign, but I talk about the afterlife. I talk about what it means to be born again, what it means to what happens when you die. I'll just tell you right now, it's pretty straightforward. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. That's what Paul told us. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Well, why does Yeshua say this? No one has ascended into heaven, because the resurrection hadn't happened yet. right? No, he had not suffered on the cross and rose again 3 days later, and the graves weren't opened yet in Jerusalem with all the saints walking around. Like, all that stuff hadn't happened yet. And so anyways, it's just interesting to me that people don't understand the order of events. When he said this, that no one goes to heaven, um, that he was it was at a specific point in time where he hadn't been crucified and rose again yet with all the saints up with him, right? The moment that he died, the graves were open, and that's why he said to me, "Today, thief on the cross, you're going to dine with me in paradise." It was literal. And I'm like, okay, like last week I brought up Lazarus and the rich man in Abraham's bosom, and like, okay, like when Lazarus died, if that's not a parable, which it isn't a parable, it's an actual true account in Luke 16. Like, okay, this guy Lazarus dies, and he's in paradise, he's comforted. Again, that's not heaven. I'm not gonna. That's the thing there, because we're not told that that's heaven. We're told that it's Abraham's bosom. There's a specific phrase that Yeshua uses, and so I have to go off of that. I have to go off what Yeshua says. He didn't say heaven. He said Abraham's bosom. So again, if that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you, maybe check out last week's teaching. Like, I talk about hell. I talk about the fact that believers that die, they used to go to Abraham's bosom, but now to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, that you could actually be in the throne. And that's what it teaches. That's just what the Bible teaches. Again, that's what I do. I just proclaim. If you don't like what I'm proclaiming, then I'm sorry. I'm just proclaiming what the scriptures teach. I had people get a little frustrated with me that I teach about people dying and going to heaven. Hey, that's what it says. Again, if you want more details on that, though, I recommend episode 17, the 1,000-year reign episode. It talks about the afterlife, talks about a lot of stuff. It's a really in-depth presentation. But the main thing here, going back to Numbers 21, is that Moses made the fiery serpent, and what he didn't realize when he did that was it was actually a picture, a foreshadow of when the Messiah would show up, and when he's lifted up, like whoever believes in him, what he did, who sent him, in his name. He literally says in his name. And yes, I'm not one of those weirdos that says, oh, if you say Jesus, you're not saved or whatever. Like it could be Jesucristo, Jesus, Yeshua, Jesus. If you understand who he is, and his name, even in English equivalents or modern Spanish, German, French equivalents, it's not about intellect and perfectly knowing the exact translation and the exact pronunciation of his name. We're not saved because of how intellectual we are. We're saved because of faith. And so as long as you have faith, put your faith in him, that promise of that bronze serpent being lifted up, and he's a picture of that. Like, that was a picture of him, the bronze serpent being lifted up, and whoever looks and believes, understands and believes, you believe in the name of Yeshua, you have eternal life. It's really that simple. But it's not just a matter of believing only, but actually doing the things that he's commanded. And that is where a lot of people get tripped up, because they rather do the works of darkness rather than the works of light. Very, very simple concept to understand. Again, I encourage you, go to the first 5 books, look at Moses, make Moses your foundation, and then build your house on top of that. Numbers 21:10. Now the children of Israel moved on and camped in Oboth. They journeyed from Oboth and camped at Abarim in the wilderness, which is east of Moab, toward the sunrise. From there, they moved and camped in the valley of Zered. From there, they moved and camped on the other side of Arnon, which is in the wilderness that extends from the border of the Amorites. For the Arnon is the border of Moab, between Moab and the Amorites. Therefore, it is said in the book of the wars of Yehovah, Wahab and Suphah, the brooks of the Arnon, and the slope of the brooks that reaches to the dwelling of Ar, and lies on the border of Moab. From there, they went to Beer, which is the well where Yehovah said to Moses, gather the people together, and I will give them water. Then Israel sang this song, spring up, O well, all of you sing to it. The well the leaders sank, dug by the nation's nobles, by their lawgiver with their staves. And from the wilderness, they went to Matana. Pause real quick. Isn't it amazing? We see a picture of God's grace here. When most people, I talk to most New Testament Christians, they're like, oh, the Old Testament, oh, God's a God of judgment and law and wrath, and he's mean and angry all the time. Even atheists say this kind of stuff. Like everybody says that. Like the Old Testament God's so mean, but you literally see his grace here after they say your bread from heaven is worthless and despicable. After they say that, he's still providing water for them, and it's pretty amazing. Like he is pretty merciful. Like his grace is amazing, and the literally, in spite of being spit on, slapped, in the face with their words, like the words that they were saying were disrespectful to say the least. Like what the people were saying, and they hated the manna. They're like, "Why'd you bring us out here? This is ridiculous." And he's still providing water. It's truly a picture of God's grace. He doesn't change. He was graceful back then. He's graceful now. It's just amazing. So Numbers 21:19, from Matanah to Nahaliel, from Nahaliel to Bamoth, from Bamoth, in the valley that is in the country of Moab, to the top of Pisgah, which looks down on the wasteland. Then in Numbers 21:21, it says, Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, saying, "Let me pass through your land. We will not turn aside into fields or vineyards. We will not drink water from wells. We will go by the king's highway until we have passed through your territory." But Sihon would not allow Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered his people together and went out against Israel and all in the wilderness. And he came to Jahaz and fought against Israel. Then Israel defeated him with the edge of the sword and took possession of his land from the Arnon to the Jabbok, as far as the people of Ammon, for the border of the people of Ammon was fortified. So Israel took all these cities, and Israel dwelt in all the cities of the Amorites, in Heshbon and in all its villages. And for Heshbon was the city of the king, was the city of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab, and had taken all his land from his hand as far as the Arnon. Therefore, those who speak in Proverbs say, "Come to Heshbon, let it build, let the city of Sihon be repaired. For fire went out from Heshbon, a flame from the city of Sihon. It consumed Ar of Moab, the lords of the heights of the Arnon. Woe to you, Moab, you have perished, O people of Chemosh. He has given his sons as fugitives, his daughters into captivity, to Sihon, king of the Amorites. But we have shot at them. Heshbon has perished as far as Dibon. Then we laid waste as far as Nophah, which reaches to Medeba. Thus Israel dwelt in the land of the Amorites." When I look at this proverb, it's kind of scary. It's kind of scary because it says, "Woe to you, Moab, you have perished." He has given his sons as fugitives, his daughters into captivity. And what I'm going to say is, when I read this language, I'm like, wow, coming to a theater near you. This is America, in my opinion, next year. Watch out for September 22nd. I talked about it earlier in this presentation, but September 22nd, watch out for the Abomination of Desolation. That's my date for it. If you want to check out how I derived that, go to the website, overcomebabylon.com. Look at how I derived all that. But this captivity, this being a fugitive, your daughters and sons, it's coming to Western nations. Based off of all my research, everything that I've discovered, I can see that happening starting next year. Certainly, Abomination of Desolation will have a lot to do with that, based off my interpretation of what that is. Now let's take a look at Numbers 21:32. Then Moses sent to spy out Yazer. They took its villages and drove out the Amorites who were there. Then they turned and went up by the way to Bashan. So Og, king of Bashan, went out against him, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. Then Jehovah said to Moses, "Do not fear him, for I have delivered him into your hand with all his people and his land, and you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwell at Heshbon." So they defeated him, his sons, and all his people, until there was no survivor left, him, and they took possession of his land. What I find really fascinating here is that oops, I'm going to look that up real quick. Og, Bashan. Is that, again, God is with the Israelites. He's with the Israelites, and it's amazing that he's giving them water and actually fighting their battles and handing people possession land. Like, he's giving them cities. He's giving them a lot. And it's really an amazing picture of his grace. Like I told you, we have 13 sins on the table now. The 10 deadly sins, they're not going to enter the promised land. Then there's 3 big sins after that, and it costs people their lives. And again, it's just amazing, incredible to me that this God, this Yehovah of the Bible, is so merciful. He's so gracious and amazing. And I want to, this is what I was going to look at, Deuteronomy 3:11. It literally says that Og, this guy Og, king of Bashan, that they defeated, Yehovah starts by saying, "Do not fear him. I'm going to deliver him," right? But it says that he was a remnant of the, wait for it, Raphaim. You look at that word, it's Raphaim. Again, those are descendants of the giants, the angelic mixed human hybrids from Genesis chapter 6. You see that he's a giant. And it says that his bedstead was an iron bedstead, 9 cubits in length, 4 cubits width, according to a standard cubit. I've done the math on this. I did it during a podcast episode. You're looking at anywhere from 12 to 14 feet tall. 12 to 14. So this dude was literally 12 to 14 feet tall. And Elohim says, don't be afraid of him. Don't be afraid of him. And you know what? You got to give the people credit here. You got to give the people credit. They believed, do not fear him, and they believed him. They defeated him. It doesn't say they complained. It doesn't say they were faithless. It didn't say they ran away. They didn't say, oh, why have you brought us out to kill us? They actually killed this guy and his sons. We can assume his sons were also tall, and his people, we can assume, were also maybe 8, 10, 12, 14 feet tall. Again, how many cubits was it? 9 cubits. You do the math. You look at Deuteronomy 3, Deuteronomy 3:11. Go look up what a cubit is, a biblical cubit, and you're going to see that's like 12 to 14 feet tall that this guy was, depending on the standard of the cubit that was being used at this time. But I mean, it's not like we can't know within a certain certainty. Like it's at least 12 feet tall. Like it's significant that they defeated him, and they weren't faithless cowards about it. They actually took care of business. After we read about this, we go to Numbers 22, verse 1, and it says that the children of Israel moved and camped in the plains of Moab on the side of Jordan across from Jericho. So this is when they get close to Jericho. Okay, but it's not until Joshua comes around that they actually take care of business and overtake Jericho. So just something to think about there. That Jericho is defeated later. And what we're going to see next is a very important account of the scriptures. Probably one of the most famous, most quoted, most interesting accounts happens next. But I want you to think, as we wrap up today, what it's talking about and what the scriptures have shown us, that there's a cyclical nature to Israel's relationship with the Most High God. There's times when they are full of faith. They're doing what's right in his eyes. They're taking out these giant Rephaim, basically genetic abomination. I mean, these things, these like 9 cubit tall, they're taking care of business. They're doing what's right in God's eyes, but there's also times when they complain, but then they fall into grace. They fall out of grace. There's this cyclical nature to the life and the faith of the children of Israel. And so what I'm going to present, what I'm going to suggest is that the cyclical nature of what we see here, I think it's normal. I think it's very common in every single one of our lives to have this cyclical walk with God, but we should strive as much as possible to make it linear, where we're consistently going up and we're consistently increasing, growing. And I think a lot of that has to do with habits. A lot of that has to do with routine, which is something that I kind of struggle with, but a lot of it has to do with a consistent pattern of worship. And that's why I think Daniel, when we read about Daniel, Noah, and Job, like the 3 most righteous men, Ezekiel shows us that these are the 3 most righteous men: Daniel, Noah, and Job. When we look at the life of Daniel, which I spend a lot of time talking about, and there's a reason for that. We look at Daniel, you see a pattern where he's praying 3 times a day. You see pattern that makes him this righteous man. And so what I think breaks that cycle of the ups and downs and obedience and disobedience, obedience and disobedience and sin and all the consequences of sin, and then, okay, I'm going to do what's right. And I think what breaks that cycle, breaking the cycle of the highs and lows and ups and downs and consequences and blessings, the evil consequences and blessings, I think what breaks that is consistent habits, habitual worship, habitual entering into God's presence like Daniel did. So, what we're going to read about next in the next portion of scripture is that Israel, that God looked and there was no fault with Israel. There's nothing wrong with them at this point in history. They're doing what's right. And he literally says, I find no iniquity in the tents of Jacob. And we're going to read about that next week. Thank you for joining me. I see Eric, I see your comment that the audio keeps cutting out. So far, that hasn't been really an issue for anybody, as far as I know. So hopefully, when I'm done recording and I turn everything off, hopefully it all turns out good. But I'm sorry to hear that you had audio troubles, brother Eric. Thank you everybody else for hanging out with me for this Torah portion. Be blessed. I will catch you next week, and stay tuned because we're going to talk about really one of the most important and fascinating accounts of you can learn so much from what we're about to read next, and Balaam and Balak and the whole account. There's so much we're going to learn. I can't wait to get into it. So just keep an eye out, and I'll see you next week. Shalom. May Yehovah bless you. I'll catch you next time.